If you ever want to understand how a heart breaks without making a sound, look at a mother packing her suitcase while her son stands in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cold. "If you don't want to move into a nursing home," my son said, staring straight through me, "then pack your things and get out of my house." His voice didn't shake. Mine didn't either. I just stood there, listening to the words echo inside my chest like a door slamming shut. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile you wear when something inside you finally gives up. I folded my clothes slowly, carefully, as if each movement might steady my hands. Old blouses I had sewn myself, dresses worn thin by years of work, scarves that still smelled faintly of lavender. I tucked away photographs next, my wedding day with Albert, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing like the world could never touch us. David as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, my own mother standing in the backyard of the house where I grew up. I closed the suitcase with a soft click. Not a single tear fell. Tears were a luxury I had used up long ago. That house wasn't just walls and furniture. It was my life. I bought it stitch by stitch, sewing wedding dresses for other women for 32 years. Every piece of lace paid for a brick. Every sleepless night bent over a sewing machine built that home. But that Sunday afternoon in March, none of it mattered. I was still standing at the sink earlier, washing dishes because Emily, my daughter-in-law, liked to remind me that I was better in the kitchen. My floral dress was damp, my hands rough and trembling around the sponge, when David walked in. He wore the same frown he had as a child when his father scolded him, but Albert had been gone for 13 years, and the 42-year-old man in front of me was no longer the boy I raised. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. I dried my hands on an embroidered towel made by an old friend and turned to him with a tired smile. "What is it, dear?" That's when Emily appeared. Perfect nails, sleek hair, dark red lipstick. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, like she was waiting for entertainment. "We've decided," David said, avoiding my eyes. "The house feels cramped. The kids need more space, and you're getting older. Maybe it's time you found a place that fits you better." My heart thudded hard. I already knew what was coming. "A place that fits me better?" I repeated. "You mean a nursing home?" He nodded quickly, relieved I had said it for him. "There are really nice ones, Mom. Activities, friends, nurses." The word exploded out of me before I could stop it. "A nursing home?" The kitchen fell silent. Emily scrolled on her phone, pretending not to listen. When David finally looked at me, his eyes were cold. "Not a nursing home," he corrected, "an upscale assisted living community." I met his gaze. "The only difference," I said calmly, "is that you're trying to get rid of me." Then he shouted, "Then go! If you don't want to move into a nursing home, pack your bags and leave my house." His voice echoed off the walls I had painted, through the hallway I cleaned every day, up the stairs I climbed with aching knees. Emily tried to hide her smirk. I saw it. That was the moment the last illusion shattered. Not my heart. That had broken long ago. It was the lie that I still had a family. I took a breath and smiled. "All right, David, I'll pack my things." His face flickered with confusion. He had expected tears, pleading, a scene. Instead, I walked upstairs to the small room at the back of the house, barely bigger than a storage closet, and pulled out the old leather suitcase I had brought with me 3 years earlier when I sold my apartment to help them. Before I go on, let me pause here for a moment. If stories like this, real, raw, and uncomfortable, matter to you, follow this account and subscribe for more. These aren't just stories, they're reminders of self-respect, strength, and the quiet power of standing up for yourself, even when it hurts. An hour later, I carried the suitcase downstairs. David sat on the couch I had bought, Emily beside him, satisfaction written all over her face. The doorbell rang. David opened the door with an annoyed sigh and froze. Outside stood a black limousine. The driver stepped aside, and a tall man in his 70s emerged, silver hair neatly combed, dressed in a deep navy suit. Henry Montgomery, Albert's former business partner, the wealthiest man in the neighborhood. David's mouth fell open. Emily turned pale. Henry walked straight past them and smiled at me. "Catherine," he said warmly, "are you ready?" I picked up my suitcase and gave my son one last look. "Thank you for everything, David. The house is all yours now." As I stepped outside, his smile vanished completely. Through the limousine window, I saw him standing motionless on the porch, watching his mother leave in silence. For the first time in 3 years, I felt free. Inside the car, the scent of leather and expensive cologne filled the air. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from relief. "Are you all right?" Henry asked softly. I tried to say I was fine. What came out was a sigh. "I don't even know how I feel." He nodded, understanding more than he said. When we reached his glass tower downtown, the guards greeted him with respect. I remained invisible, just a woman beside him. The elevator reflected a 68-year-old woman with gray hair tied back and swollen eyes. "You still look beautiful, Catherine," Henry said gently. "You always have." His penthouse opened into sunlight, marble floors, and silence. "This is your house now." That night, as I sat on the edge of a bed larger than the room I'd lived in for years, my phone buzzed endlessly. David calling, messages piling up. I turned the phone face down. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. But what David didn't know was this: the limousine wasn't the real shock. It was only the beginning. I didn't sleep much that first night in Henry's penthouse. The bed was soft, the room silent, the city glowing beyond the glass walls, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, memories pressed in like shadows. Not just the moment David told me to leave, but the years leading up to it. All the small humiliations I had swallowed, all the warnings I chose to ignore because a mother's heart is stubborn and hope can be cruel. When morning finally came, pale sunlight slipped through the linen curtains. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I sat up and reality settled in. I was no longer in the tiny room at the back of David's house. I walked onto the balcony and looked down at the city. From this height, everything looked distant, orderly, almost peaceful. Nothing like the gray wall and rusted water tank that had been my daily view for 3 years. As I stood there, memories surfaced uninvited. 3 years earlier, I had sold my small 2-bedroom apartment. That place was modest, but it was mine. I paid for it with decades of sewing wedding dresses, my fingers raw from needles, my eyes burning late into the night. David had come over one afternoon with Emily, both of them smiling too brightly. "Mom, living alone isn't safe anymore," he'd said. "What if something happens?" Emily added sweetly. "Our house is big. The kids adore you. We'll take care of you." Take care of me. I believed them. They convinced me to sell my apartment for $180,000 and invest in David's business, a family partnership, he called it. I handed over the money without hesitation, thinking I was helping my son build a future. I never asked for receipts, never questioned where the money went. 3 years passed, and I never saw a single dollar return. Then things started disappearing. My grandmother Clarice's jewelry vanished first, a pearl brooch, a gold ring with an amethyst, an amber necklace she carried with her when she fled Europe during the war. I kept them in a blue velvet box hidden in my dresser. One day, the box was gone. When I asked David, he barely looked up from his phone. "Maybe you misplaced it." Emily smiled from the doorway. "At your age, forgetting things is normal. My grandma was the same way before the nursing home." The nursing home. She planted that idea early. 6 months later, I saw a photo online of Emily in Cancun wearing a bracelet identical to mine. When I asked her about it, she laughed. "Oh, I bought it at a market in Mexico." I said nothing. I told myself I was imagining things because admitting the truth meant I was being robbed inside my own family. The worst memory came 8 months ago. I went downstairs late one night for water and froze on the stairs when I heard Emily's voice. "Just a few more months," she said, laughing. "Then she'll be in a nursing home. I'll turn her room into my walk-in closet." She went on, bragging about spending the money from selling my apartment and how David does whatever I say. I cried into my pillow that night, silent, ashamed of my own weakness. Standing on Henry's balcony now, those memories no longer felt distant. They felt sharp, like glass. And suddenly, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. I picked up my phone, dozens of missed calls, messages from David. "Mom, please answer. I didn't mean it. We need to talk." I blocked his number. My hand shook, but my decision didn't. A soft knock came at the door. Henry entered carrying a tray with tea and biscuits, chamomile and Melissa, my favorite. "How did you know?" I asked quietly. He smiled sadly. "Albert told me. You drank it every night." Hearing Albert's name still hurt, but it also reminded me that once someone had seen me, truly seen me. Over tea, Henry confessed something he had held back for decades. He told me he had loved me since the day Albert introduced us, when I was 23 in a yellow dress with tiny flowers. He said he stayed silent out of loyalty and respect. I listened, stunned, realizing how invisible I had become to my own family and how visible I was to someone who owed me nothing. Later that morning, Henry asked me to get dressed. "We have an appointment," he didn't explain. An hour later, we sat in a sleek office across from his lawyer, Dr. Oliver Sampson. The room smelled of leather and paper. Oliver opened a blue folder and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Catherine, did you know your husband was a co-founder of Montgomery Holdings?" I nodded. Of course I knew. "What you may not know," he continued, "is that Albert left a notarized will. 40% of the company belongs to you." My breath caught. "That's impossible," I whispered. "David said everything was his." Oliver slid documents across the table. Dates, signatures, proof. I stared at Albert's handwriting, my name printed clearly beside 40%. Then came the final blow. 2 years ago, Oliver said, "Your son sold the company's shares. He forged your signature and kept the money." The number echoed in my head, $1.68 million, with interest and damages over $2.3 million. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply said, "I want to sue." When we left the office, the city felt different, lighter, not because justice was done, but because it had finally begun. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. 2 days later, Oliver called. He's been served. From his reaction, I'd say today is the worst day of your son's life. I looked out at the rising sun and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Power. But what I didn't know yet was that David's betrayal was only half the truth. The real poison was still hidden, and once it surfaced, it would change everything I thought I knew about my family. 3 weeks passed after the lawsuit was filed. 3 weeks of silence from me. 3 weeks during which David tried to call from unknown numbers, sent emails I never opened, and left voicemails I never listened to. Silence can be cruel, but it can also be powerful. I wanted him to sit with his fear. I wanted him to feel, just for a moment, the uncertainty I had lived with for years. During those weeks, Henry did something I hadn't asked for but deeply needed. He hired a private investigator. Not for revenge, he said, for clarity. "You can't fight an enemy you don't fully understand," Henry told me one evening as we sat on the balcony, the city humming below us. At the time, I didn't realize my own son would soon be called my enemy. The investigator's report arrived on a quiet Saturday morning, a thick envelope, photos, bank records, names I didn't recognize. I sat at the dining table, hands folded, heart steady but alert. Henry stood behind me, his presence grounding. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. I nodded. The first pages were about Emily. Photographs showed her entering hotels I had never heard of, leaving apartments that weren't hers, laughing with a man who was definitely not David. He was younger, muscular, shaved head, always dressed like he had just left a gym. The investigator's notes were precise. Name, Ethan Carter. Age, 32. Profession, fitness trainer. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from confirmation. Deep down, I had known. "They've been seeing each other for over a year," Henry said quietly. 2 or 3 times a week, same hotel near the highway. I stared at the photos, feeling an unexpected calm. The perfect daughter-in-law, the devoted wife, it had all been a performance. Then came the bank statements. Money transferred into a joint account under Emily's name and Ethan's. Dates lined up perfectly with the time my grandmother, Clarice's jewelry disappeared. The investigator slid one more page forward. The jewelry was sold downtown, $23,000. My fingers trembled, not because of the amount, but because those pieces were priceless to me. They carried history, survival, memory, and she had sold them to fund an affair. "There's more," Henry said, his voice tightening. "Plane tickets, Cancun, booked under Emily and Ethan's names. A 5-star hotel, paid with a credit card tied to David's account." I closed my eyes. That girls' trip she had bragged about suddenly made sense. "Does David know?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Henry hesitated. "He does. He found out 6 months ago. She cried, promised to stop, and he accepted it." I laughed, a hollow sound. Afraid of divorce, afraid of being alone, afraid of losing the kids. My son had chosen silence again. "Give everything to Oliver," I said coldly. "This changes the case." Henry nodded. "I'm already arranging it." 2 days later, I rang the bell of the house that used to be mine. Emily opened the door, forcing a smile that barely hid her hatred. "What do you want?" "I need to speak to my son privately," I said calmly. David appeared behind her, thinner, eyes hollow. "Let her in," he murmured. Inside, everything looked the same. Furniture untouched, photos still on the walls, but it no longer felt like home. David led me to his office and shut the door. Silence hung heavy between us. "I know about Emily and Ethan." His face drained of color. "I know she cheated. I know she sold my mother's jewelry, and I know you knew." He broke down. Tears, excuses, fear.
"I'm scared, Mom, of losing the kids, of being alone." I looked at him and saw not the man who betrayed me, but the boy who never learned how to stand up. "You have to choose," I said firmly. "Either you wake up or you lose everything." As I walked out, Emily stood in the living room having heard it all. I stopped at the door and turned back. "I hope you enjoyed Cancun. Your next trip will be to prison." Her face went pale. That night, Oliver called with urgency in his voice. "Catherine, we have a problem." My stomach dropped. "Emily filed a restraining order. She claims you threatened her life. She's also requesting the court restrict your contact with the children." The room spun. Fear flooded me for the first time since leaving that house. Not fear for myself, but for Peter and Alice, my grandchildren. Losing them would destroy me. The hearing came faster than I expected. In the courtroom, Emily played the role of the terrified mother perfectly. Tears, trembling voice. Her lawyer spoke of threats, emotional harm, and frightened children. When the judge finally spoke, my breath caught in my throat. "I grant the petition in part," she said. My world collapsed. But then came the rest. I was barred from approaching the family residence, but visitation with my grandchildren would continue under supervision. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Outside the courthouse, I broke down in Henry's arms. "She won," I sobbed. "She separated me from my grandchildren." He held me tightly. "No," he whispered, "this was just one battle. The war isn't over." That night, as I sat awake staring into the darkness, Henry brought me a folder. Financial documents, debt records, red numbers everywhere. He said, "David's business is collapsing, and I quietly bought most of his debt. I'm now his biggest creditor." I looked at the papers, realization dawning. For the first time, my son's future was in my hands. And that's when I understood something crucial. Emily had played dirty, but she had underestimated me. And when an Italian grandmother decides to fight back, she doesn't fight to wound, she fights to win.
The next morning, I woke with a calm that surprised even me. It wasn't peace, it wasn't relief, it was something colder and sharper, clarity. For years, I had lived reacting to other people's decisions, apologizing when I wasn't wrong, staying silent when I was hurt. That phase of my life had ended the moment David told me to leave my own house. Now I was no longer reacting, I was planning. I sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee, the city stretching endlessly beyond the windows, and reread the documents Henry had given me the night before. Balance sheets, debt summaries, legal notes. David's company wasn't just struggling, it was bleeding. Unpaid taxes, outstanding salaries, vendors threatening lawsuits. In less than 6 months, the total debt would cross $500,000, and through a chain of intermediary companies, Henry now controlled most of it. "You did this for me," I said quietly when he joined me. Henry met my gaze without hesitation. "I did it because consequences matter," he replied, "and because you deserve to decide what happens next." His words stayed with me. Decide. For the first time in years, I had a choice. Still, something felt incomplete. A quiet doubt tugged at me. David had been weak, yes, cowardly, yes, but was he truly capable of orchestrating everything that had happened? The forged signatures, the missing money, the slow collapse of his business. I needed certainty. I called Oliver immediately. "I want a forensic accountant," I said, "the best one you know." He didn't ask why. He understood. "I'll have someone start today." While waiting for that report, I made another decision, one that twisted my heart even as I made it. I hired a private investigator who specialized in child welfare. "I want to know how my grandchildren are living," I told him. School attendance, meals, routines, everything. Saying those words out loud felt like betrayal, but protecting Peter and Alice mattered more than protecting illusions. The days that followed were the longest I could remember. I barely slept, every hour stretched thin with anticipation. When Oliver finally arrived a week later, the look on his face told me everything before he even spoke. "Sit down, Catherine," he said quietly. "You need to see this." He opened the folder slowly, page by page, charts filled with red markings, highlighted transactions, names circled in black ink. "Your son isn't a criminal mastermind," Oliver said carefully. "He's incompetent. Bad investments, poor decisions, but the systematic draining of funds." He paused and tapped the page. That was Emily. The numbers were staggering. Over $340,000 vanished from the company over 3 years. Fake vendors, unauthorized withdrawals, transfers routed through accounts tied to Emily, her mother, and one account I recognized instantly, Ethan Carter, the lover. Every trail led back to her. "There's more," Oliver continued, sliding another document toward me. "Your grandmother's jewelry? It wasn't sold for $23,000. It was sold for $58,000. The jeweler was her cousin. She pocketed the difference." My hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Rage burned through me, but it was controlled now, focused. The investigator's report about the children arrived the next day. I read it slowly, forcing myself not to look away. Peter had missed school multiple times because no one picked him up. Alice had sunburns from being left outside too long, fast food dinners, missed meals, long hours alone while their parents argued. There were photos, videos, evidence that couldn't be explained away. I held those pages against my chest and whispered their names. My grandchildren, used as shields, as weapons. Something inside me hardened. "Is this enough?" I asked Oliver when he returned. He didn't hesitate. "This isn't just enough," he said grimly. "This is an arsenal." That night, I sat with Henry on the balcony, the city lights flickering like distant stars. "I could destroy them both," I said honestly. "I could send Emily to prison, bankrupt David, and take full custody of the kids." The words felt heavy, final. I looked down at my hands, but he's still my son. Henry didn't interrupt. He waited. "So what will you do?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I'll give him one last chance. One." The word tasted bitter. "On my terms." I outlined the deal clearly. I would erase the $520,000 debt. In return, David would divorce Emily immediately, attend therapy with me and the children, and repay every cent he stole, $1.68 million over time. If he refused, I would unleash everything. Henry studied me with something like admiration. "You're not just strong, you're strategic." The meeting was scheduled at Oliver's office the following Tuesday. Neutral ground, lawyers present, a therapist, witnesses. When I arrived, I wore a simple gray dress. No jewelry, no armor. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, unshakable. David walked in first. He looked like a man hollowed out from the inside. Then Emily entered. Tight red dress, perfect makeup, but her arrogance was gone. Fear flickered behind her eyes. As Oliver began, charts filled the screen. Transactions, proof, names. David's face drained with every slide. When Ethan's name appeared, the room seemed to stop breathing. "This is all lies," Emily shouted, but the forensic accountant spoke calmly, dismantling her denial piece by piece.
transfers, properties, accounts. Then came the photos of the children, Peter alone outside school, Alice's sunburned arm. The therapist spoke of neglect, regression, trauma. David collapsed into his chair. "I didn't know," he whispered. I stood then, my voice steady and sharp, "because you never looked." Finally, Oliver placed the contract in front of my son. 3 conditions, 1 choice. Silence swallowed the room as David read. Emily screamed at him not to sign, threatened him, begged him. When he picked up the pen, something in her broke. He signed. Her scream echoed as security escorted her out. I walked to David and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Now we rebuild," I whispered. But as I left the office, a strange unease settled in my chest. Something wasn't finished. Not yet, because Emily, humiliated and cornered, still had 1 card left to play, and she was desperate enough to use it.
For a brief moment after the meeting at Oliver's office, I allowed myself to believe the worst was over. Emily had been exposed. David had signed the agreement. The truth was finally out in the open, raw and undeniable. I thought that once lies were dragged into the light, they lost their power. I was wrong. The first sign came 3 days later, early in the morning, when my phone rang before sunrise. It was Oliver. He never called that early unless something was seriously wrong. "Catherine," he said without preamble, "we have a situation." My chest tightened. What kind of situation? There was a pause on the line, too long. "Emily has filed an emergency motion with the court." I sat up in bed, the city still dark beyond the windows. "For what?" I asked. Oliver exhaled slowly. "She's accusing you of coercion and emotional abuse. She claims you manipulated David into signing the agreement under psychological pressure." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "That's absurd," I said. "There were witnesses, lawyers, everything was documented." "I know," Oliver replied, "but she's not stopping there." By noon, the full picture emerged. Emily had gone on the offensive. She contacted Child Services, claiming that I was poisoning David against her and traumatizing the children. She painted herself as a victim of an unstable, vengeful grandmother using money and influence to destroy a young family. And worst of all, she had found someone willing to support her story: David. When Henry told me, I felt something inside my chest crack, not shatter, just split open enough to hurt deeply. "He didn't mean to," Henry said gently. "He's panicking. She's pressuring him, threatening to take the kids and disappear." I closed my eyes. Even now, even after everything, my son was still afraid. That afternoon, I met David alone for the first time since the meeting. He looked exhausted, hands shaking as he wrapped them around a cup of untouched coffee. "Mom," he said quietly, "she says if I don't help her, she'll disappear with the kids. I won't see them again." His voice broke. "I can't lose them." I stared at him, searching his face for the man I hoped he could still become. "She's lying," I said firmly. "She's desperate." "What if she's not?" he whispered. "What if she actually does it?" In that moment, I understood something painful. David wasn't choosing sides. He was drowning, and desperate people make terrible choices. 2 days later, the blow landed. And court notice arrived stating that, pending investigation, all agreements signed at Oliver's office were temporarily frozen. Worse, an emergency hearing was scheduled to reconsider my supervised visitation with Peter and Alice. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Emily wasn't just trying to save herself. She was trying to erase me from my grandchildren's lives. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights as if they might give me answers. Henry sat beside me in silence. Finally, he spoke. "You're still thinking like a mother, not like someone fighting for survival." I turned to him. "What does that mean?" He met my gaze. "It means you're holding back." The next morning, I stopped holding back. I called Oliver and told him to prepare everything, not just the financial fraud, not just the forged signatures, everything. The jewelry, the affair, the child neglect, the false statements. I want a full counter motion, and I want it airtight. Oliver didn't hesitate. Then we stopped playing defense. While the lawyers worked, I did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. I agreed to a psychological evaluation requested by the court. I knew Emily would spin that against me if I refused. Let them examine me, I thought. Let them see the truth. The evaluation took 3 hours. Questions about my past, my marriage to Albert, my relationship with David, the day I was thrown out. When it ended, the psychologist looked at me with quiet respect. "You're not vengeful," she said. "You're grieving, and you're protecting yourself." Her report would later become one of our strongest weapons. Then came the investigator's final update. Emily had tried to move money again, small amounts, transferred hastily as if she were preparing an escape. She had contacted Ethan twice in the last week, and most importantly, she had asked her sister in another state about schools for the children. My hands went cold when I read that. "She's planning to run," I said aloud. Henry nodded grimly. "That's what it looks like." For the first time, fear turned into resolve. If Emily disappeared with Peter and Alice, I might never see them again. That was a line I would die before letting her cross. The emergency hearing arrived faster than I expected. The courtroom felt smaller than before, heavier. Emily sat with her lawyer, eyes red, posture fragile. David sat beside her, torn, silent. When I walked in, I felt every gaze turn toward me, not with sympathy, with judgment. Emily's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of an elderly woman obsessed with control, using wealth and influence to destroy her daughter-in-law. He claimed I manipulated my son, threatened Emily, and emotionally harmed the children. I listened without interrupting, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Then Oliver stood. He dismantled the story piece by piece. He presented financial records, evidence of fraud, proof of the affair, documentation of child neglect, the psychologist's report, photos, messages, transfer attempts made just days earlier. The courtroom grew silent as the truth spread like a stain no one could ignore. When Emily took the stand, she cracked. Her voice trembled, her story shifted, dates didn't match, lies collided with facts. Finally, the judge raised her hand. "Enough," she said sharply. She turned to David. "Mr. Montgomery, do you stand by your wife's claims?" The room held its breath. David looked at Emily, then at me, and for the first time in years, he didn't look afraid. "I don't," he said quietly. Emily gasped, her composure shattering. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped completely. As the judge announced a recess to review the evidence, I felt my heart pounding violently. Everything balanced on this moment: my future, my grandchildren, my family. Outside the courtroom, Henry took my hand. "No matter what happens next," he said, "you didn't lose yourself." I nodded, swallowing hard.
But before the judge returned, before the ruling could be spoken, something happened that none of us expected. A court officer hurried into the room, whispering urgently into the judge's ear. Her expression changed instantly. She looked up and said words that made my blood run cold. "Mrs. Catherine, there has been an incident involving Emily." And in that moment, I knew whatever she had done this time would change everything.
The courtroom fell into a stunned silence after the judge's words. An incident involving Emily. My heart began to pound so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. I stood frozen, hands gripping the edge of the bench, my mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Had she run? Had she hurt herself? Or worse, had she tried to take the children? The judge adjourned the hearing immediately. We were escorted into a smaller chamber while court officers moved with urgent efficiency. Minutes felt like hours. David sat hunched forward, face buried in his hands, whispering Peter's and Alice's names over and over like a prayer. I wanted to reach for him, but I stayed still. This was a moment where strength mattered more than comfort. Finally, a senior court officer entered with a folder and a grim expression. "Mrs. Emily Montgomery was apprehended 30 minutes ago at the interstate bus terminal," he announced. "She attempted to board a bus out of state using forged documents. She had packed belongings for herself and the 2 minors." The room seemed to tilt. She had tried to run with my grandchildren? David let out a broken sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "She was really going to do it," he whispered. I closed my eyes, a wave of cold washing through me. All my fears, all my instincts had been right. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was protection. The officer continued. During the arrest, additional evidence was recovered. Cash, jewelry matching items reported stolen, and correspondence indicating intent to evade court jurisdiction. He paused. Child Protective Services has taken temporary emergency custody of Peter and Alice pending the judge's ruling. Temporary custody, the words echoed in my head. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to remain upright. I would not collapse now, not when my grandchildren needed me most. The judge returned shortly after, her expression unreadable. She reviewed the new information in silence, then looked directly at Emily's empty seat. "Based on the attempted abduction, evidence of fraud, and ongoing risk to the children," she said firmly, "this court is issuing an immediate arrest warrant for Emily Montgomery and revoking any prior claims against Mrs. Catherine." My breath caught. She turned her gaze to David. "Mr. Montgomery, you will undergo a full parental evaluation. Until then, temporary guardianship of Peter and Alice will be granted to Mrs. Catherine, effective immediately." For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Temporary guardianship. The courtroom blurred as tears filled my eyes. I pressed my mouth, overwhelmed not by victory, but by relief so deep it hurt. David stood abruptly. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, looking at me. "Thank you for protecting them when I failed." I nodded, unable to find words. This wasn't about blame anymore. It was about healing what could still be saved. That evening, Henry drove me to pick up the children. The child services building was quiet, sterile, nothing like a place children should wait. When the door finally opened and Peter ran toward me, his face crumpling in relief, I fell to my knees and held him tightly. Alice followed, clinging to my coat, trembling. "Grandma?" she whispered, as if I might disappear. "I'm here," I said over and over. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, my apartment was filled with small sounds I hadn't heard in years. Laughter, running footsteps, the clatter of dishes as Peter insisted on helping set the table. I made them grilled cheese sandwiches and warm soup. Simple food, safe food. They ate like they hadn't eaten properly in days. Later, when they were asleep in the guest room, Henry and I sat quietly in the living room. "You did the right thing," he said softly. I nodded, staring at my hands. "I didn't want a war," I replied, "but I won't let anyone hurt them." Henry reached for my hand. "That's not war, that's love." The following weeks passed in a blur of evaluations, meetings, and adjustments. Emily was formally charged with attempted parental abduction, fraud, and embezzlement. Her carefully crafted image shattered overnight. News traveled fast in our circle. Friends who once praised her devotion now whispered her name with disbelief. David started therapy immediately. He attended every session, sometimes leaving in tears, sometimes silent, but always showing up. He moved into a modest apartment close enough to visit the children under supervision. Slowly, painfully, he began to face the consequences of his choices, not just legally, but emotionally. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, David sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I don't even know if I deserve it." I studied his face, older now, stripped of illusions. "Forgiveness isn't something you ask for once, it's something you earn every day." He nodded, accepting that truth without argument. Weeks turned into months. The court hearings continued, each one peeling back another layer of lies. The evidence against Emily grew overwhelming. She was denied bail. Her family distanced themselves. The woman who once stood in my kitchen smirking now sat alone behind glass, her future uncertain. But even as justice moved forward, something inside me remained unsettled. Temporary guardianship meant exactly that, temporary. Decisions still lay ahead. Permanent custody, David's role as a father, and my own limits. I was strong, yes, but I was also aging. Caring for 2 young children was a joy, but also a responsibility that demanded honesty with myself. One night, as I tucked Alice into bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, are we staying with you forever?" The question pierced my heart. I brushed her hair back gently. "For now," I said, "and whatever happens, you're safe, I promise." Later, standing alone on the balcony, the city lights glowing below, I finally allowed myself to exhale. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and loss. I had protected what mattered most, but the road ahead was still uncertain, because the judge's final ruling was still weeks away, and when that decision came, it wouldn't just decide Emily's fate, it would decide the future of my grandchildren, of my son, and of the life I was only just beginning to rebuild. The final hearing arrived on a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels heavy, as if it understands what's at stake. I dressed slowly, carefully, choosing a soft beige coat and low heels, not to impress anyone, not to look powerful, but to look like myself, steady, present, unbreakable. Peter sat at the kitchen table finishing his cereal, while Alice hummed softly, swinging her legs. They didn't fully understand what today meant, only that something important was happening. "Grandma?" Peter asked, looking up at me. "Are we going to be okay?" I knelt beside him and met his eyes. "Yes," I said with certainty. "No matter what, we will be okay." Because by then I finally understood something I should have known long ago. Safety doesn't come from houses or money or even courts. It comes from presence, from showing up, from not disappearing when things get hard.
At the courthouse, David was already there. He stood when he saw me, his posture straighter than it used to be, though the weight in his eyes was still there. Guilt doesn't vanish easily. It shouldn't. He nodded, respectful, restrained, not asking for comfort, not demanding forgiveness, just acknowledging reality. The courtroom felt smaller this time, quieter. Emily sat behind the glass partition, dressed plainly, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no fire left in her eyes. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, not because she was defeated, but because the lies were gone, and without lies there was nothing left to hold her upright. The judge entered and began reading the summary: attempted abduction, financial fraud, child endangerment. Each charge landed like a final nail sealing a door that would never open again. Emily stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, refusing to look at me. She didn't need to. This wasn't about winning anymore. Then came the words I'd been bracing for. After reviewing all evidence, evaluations, and testimony, the judge said, "This court grants permanent sole guardianship of the minors, Peter Montgomery and Alice Montgomery, to Mrs. Catherine." For a second, I didn't breathe. Permanent. Not temporary, not conditional. Permanent. My hands trembled as I gripped the bench. Tears welled, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. I had earned every one of them. The judge continued, turning to David. "Mr. Montgomery, you will retain supervised visitation with the possibility of expansion contingent on continued therapy, stability, and demonstrated responsibility." David nodded, eyes wet. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. The gavel struck once. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. Henry stood near the steps, watching me with that calm, knowing look he always had when words weren't necessary. When I reached him, he didn't say a thing. He simply opened his arms, and for the first time in years, I let myself rest there without fear. That evening, the apartment was filled with laughter, real laughter, the kind that doesn't echo with pain afterwards. Alice helped me water the plants on the balcony, carefully spilling more water on herself than on the soil. Peter insisted on reading aloud from his school book, stumbling over words but refusing help. They were safe, and safety, I learned, sounds like noise, like mess, like life. Later, after they were asleep, David came by to say goodnight to them. He stood in the doorway of the guest room for a long moment, watching them breathe. "I don't know how to fix what I broke," he whispered. "You don't fix it all at once. You fix it by not breaking it again." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I'll keep trying." "I know," I said, and for the first time I truly meant it. Months passed. Slowly, steadily, life rebuilt itself, not into what it once was, but into something better. Peter started doing well in school again. Alice stopped waking up crying at night. Therapy helped them find words for feelings that once had no shape. And me? I found myself in small moments. Morning coffee on the balcony, sewing repairs for neighbors, baking chocolate cake every Friday, like a ritual that stitched time back together. Henry never rushed me, never pushed. He simply stayed. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, he took my hand gently. "You know," he said, "this place finally feels like a home." I smiled. "It is," I replied, "because no one here has to beg for belonging." One afternoon, Peter came home with a drawing. It showed 5 figures holding hands: Alice, Peter, David, Henry, and me in the center. "Why am I in the middle?" I asked him. He shrugged. "Because you're the strong one," he said simply. "Everything stays together because of you."
That night I cried quietly in the bathroom, not from sadness, from gratitude, from the understanding that strength isn't loud. It doesn't shout or threaten or control. Strength stays. Strength protects. Strength chooses love without allowing abuse to disguise itself as family. Emily was sentenced months later. When the news came, I felt nothing. No joy, no anger, just distance. She no longer occupied space in my heart or my thoughts, and that, I realized, was the real victory. 1 year later, on a warm Saturday morning, the apartment smelled of chocolate again. Alice danced around the kitchen. Peter argued with Henry about whose turn it was to crack the eggs. David arrived with groceries, smiling shyly, healthier, lighter, still healing. I stood there watching them all and understood something profound. I had lost a house. I had lost illusions. I had lost years to silence, but I had gained something far greater. My voice, my boundaries, my grandchildren, my peace. Some people think stories like mine are about revenge. They're not. They're about remembering who you are when someone tries to erase you, about choosing dignity when bitterness would be easier, about learning that love doesn't mean endurance, it means protection. I once thought being thrown out was the end of my life. It was the beginning, because when you finally stop begging for love from people who only know how to take, you make room for a life that doesn't hurt to live. And that life, it's worth everything.